Welcome to the Freedom to Start Fresh podcast. Today I'm joined by a good friend of mine. I've known him for 10 years now. His name is Ty Whitney. He's a commercial insurance agent, the best in the business. I mean, that goes without saying. But more than that, he's just an interesting guy, really nice guy, excellent networker. Ty, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kunal. Appreciate being part of the.
Well, thank you for being here. So we're going to dive right into things, and this is a story that I really was excited to tell, and I really want Ty to tell. Is Ty, what was your first business, and why did it make your parents nervous?
Okay. The very first business that I had was a lawn service, and which started out by my friend and I knocking on doors at the age of, I don't know, I think it was 10 or 11, somewhere thereabouts. And we started knocking on doors and asking folks if we could cut their lawns or wash their cars or wax their boats or whatever they wanted us to do. And grew up in Lighthouse Point, Florida, so there was a lot of boats around and a lot of cars. And so people said, yeah, sure, come on. And this is back before the days of the industrialized lawn services like there are now. It was just a couple kids walking around. We just went and knocked on their door, and then we cut their lawn, washed their boats, and cleaned their cars, and did whatever they asked us to do. But anyway, one day my mother said, what do we do with that cash? I said, well, I just cut someone's lawn, because that's a lot of money. So of course that got everyone really nervous.
You started this business, and I think you were developing it, and you had people that were working for you at one point. And I just wanted to highlight that you're the quintessential businessman. You turn everything into a success. And so I think you told me this before, that you were making a decent amount before you graduated high school. And when you told your parents about how much you were making, what did they say?
Yeah. So my stepfather was a CPA at the time, still is. He's still practicing. When I was getting ready to go to college, I said, well, what am I going to do with this lawn business that I've got, which turned into a pretty big business at the time for a 17-year-old kid. And I employed a bunch of my surfer buddies, and this was something we did. Became just a Saturday job, then it became a Saturday, Sunday job, then it became pretty much a 7-day-a-week job, was taking care of people's properties, boats, cars, things like that. And so when I went to my parents and said, oh, what am I going to do with this lawn business? And they said, well, just tell people you're not going to be there anymore. I said, well, okay. And, how do I structure that? And my stepfather said, well, what did you do for, how much money did you make? I said, well, I don't know. Here's the passbook. And when I showed him the passbook, back then they had passbooks, you didn't have a phone to look at. So your passbook, and he was like, oh my gosh, you've got way too much money in there. So we had to immediately file taxes and do the right thing. But, I didn't know what was going on, and he didn't think I was making any money anyway. So, because I just put it in the bank, and he never saw any cars or boats, or he never saw anything nice. So I didn't spend it. So it was kind of funny. It was just comical because it became a pretty successful business. And then what was exciting about it was, when I went to college, I actually had some money. So it was okay. Yeah.
As opposed to most kids who go to college, but
yeah. So I had a little bit of money, but worked
I've
hard.
always loved that story. I just think it's so indicative of the type of person that you are, that you're just able to succeed at whether it's lawn, and we'll start talking about the commercial insurance. It's just an amazing story. So you grew up down here, and I know that the beach and the water play a big part of your life, and we're both surfers. So growing up down here, you were surfing up and down the coast. Did you go anywhere? What's your favorite spot?
So I, again, grew up in Lighthouse Point, not too far from Lighthouse Point Marina. So what we would do is, we'd gather our buddies together, jump in the water at Lighthouse Point Marina right off the dock, with all the gas and oil and stuff that was floating around back then. It was pretty bad now that I think about it. And we paddled across the intercoastal, and the goal was to get to the beach without getting caught by the Hillsborough Beach police. So
why would they be coming after you?
Because you're trespassing
Oh.
on very wealthy people's homes. Now, back then, the homes that were there were not what they are now. Now they're, that's Billionaire Row, but we'd have to cross that A1A, and the goal was everybody would spread out. So one of us would get caught inevitably, but the remaining 7 or 8 would get through. So we'd get to go surf. So we spent most of our time as kids, young kids, surfing the beaches of Hillsborough Beach. But as we developed into cars, we were surfing all up and down the coast, spent a lot of time, mainly in New Smyrna Beach, when I was away from South Florida. We spent a lot of time in New Smyrna Beach, spent a lot of summers up there with my stepfather's family. So, it was great. New Smyrna is still my
Yeah.
favorite wave. A little sharky, but it's my
A little
favorite wave.
sharky, a little sharky. That's what I think that's one way of putting it.
Right.
It's funny that you got into insurance and yet you're surfing out there with all the sharks, which I think it's a very very sharky area.
It is.
I think there have been some great white spotted over there.
There has been. A friend of mine, I didn't see it, but a friend of mine we saw something that looked like a great white right in the surf line one time, my son and I, and it was coming straight at him. We didn't have an interaction with it directly, but you could see it. It was about 20 yards away. It sure did look like a great white. It was massive. And there's been a couple other shark events that have got my attention, put it that way. It gets you thinking.
Well, it does get you thinking. So being out there surfing with sharks, does that get you thinking about insurance in the back of your head?
Yeah, it sure does. Life insurance, disability insurance. Who's going to take over the business insurance? Those kind of funny things. But yeah, it's fun to be with nature. But when you're out in the water and you're 150 yards off the coast and you see an animal that weighs 20 times more than you do going through the water, it gets your attention. All right.
Has there been any circumstance where you've learned from it that you got back to the beach and you said, all right, I got to change things, or I'm going to take things on a different approach, both personally and then professionally as well?
Sure, absolutely. The one thing about surfing that's really, really amazing is that it's constantly changing and it's never the same. And that translates well to our business of commercial insurance. And the reason why is because there is no business that is exactly like another business. Each owner brings to the business their unique personality, their unique perspective and background, and that we have to adjust and change based on that business owner's unique perspective and try and do the best we can to address, identify their risks and address their risks of doing business. And that background of being in the water, seeing things change, seeing the environment change, it gives us the flexibility and the mindset to address those constantly changing business environment.
Yeah, I agree fully. I mean, I think it's not too different than having sharks circling around you. And you essentially, I'm a lawyer. I could say this about my profession. There are sharks in the water in the courtroom. There are sharks out there that are looking to take down businesses to nab that insurance payment. And so you've got to be extra cautious and extra careful. And I think one of the things that I think makes you unique is that you're always reading, whether that's reading the waves, reading the circumstances, or reading the policies. I mean, how many times do you find that you come across somebody that they've gotten advice and the agent that they were dealing with has not read their policy?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kunal. And it unfortunately happens all too often. And now with the advancement of internet insurance purchasing, that's become a very real situation almost on a daily basis. And that is, it's very often that we are invited by business owners to review their insurance and portfolio, commercial insurance portfolio specifically. And we'll often ask after we review the policy, where did you buy this policy? And, 20% of the time it's an agent that really just dabbled a little bit in commercial and they didn't really understand what they were involved with. The advisory role broke down somewhere along the line. But more and more, we're starting to see the advancement, as I said, of internet insurance purchasing. And there is no human interaction whatsoever. There's a series of questions, and then there's, a submit button and then an approval. And the problem is with that is that when those policies are issued, from what we can see, it's very common that the policy has exclusions as it relates to exactly what the business owner's doing.
Could you give an example of something?
I'll give you a classic example that's most recent. We picked up a new account They specialize in doing the condo milestone reports that are now required by the state law, where they inspect and do the engineering inspections for those condo associations in order to comply with that law. And when we reviewed the policy, that's a structural engineer that does that. They have to go out and analyze the structure from top to bottom and then issue an opinion as required by the state of Florida condo milestone law. And when we reviewed this company's policies, they specifically excluded anything to do with structural engineering. And
Wow.
that's a serious issue, because here's a business owner that's doing very good, very hard work, a very experienced owner when it comes to engineering. But, he's not, when he bought the policy, he did it over the internet and really just didn't understand exactly what he was buying, and was issued policies that specifically exclude what he does. And when I explained to him what exactly was going on, he was shocked, obviously, showed him the documentation to demonstrate the deficiencies. And then he gave us immediate orders to go correct the problem, get the policies rewritten into a new contract. Obviously, the cost changed drastically because the single biggest risk is structural engineering reports, and he wasn't covered for it. Now he is, but the cost changed drastically, but now he has an operating protected business. So those kind of things are really important.
Why do you think something like that happens? Why do you think that somebody with who's obviously good at what they do, I mean, it's a serious business, obviously has the education for it, and doesn't see that going online and just filling out a form or dealing with an agent that dabbles in commercial insurance, just isn't the way to go, isn't the right thing to do? What kind of mindset, or what's the trap that you think they might fall into?
Yeah,
Being able to think they can do it that way.
I think it's a good question. When I really sit down and talk to these folks and understand what exactly happened, it's very common that they just don't know that the homeowner's agent they're talking to, who dabbles in commercial, doesn't really specialize and develop an expertise in commercial insurance. I often say, and Kunal, after you and I've talked about this, is that there is no standard language in a commercial insurance policy. There's contracts can be easily revised to include coverage or exclude coverage. And it's our job as the agent to try and negotiate that language in as best as possible. Now, does every underwriter say, oh, sure, I'll be happy to plug that risk in that language? No, of course they don't. And sometimes it's not even an option. But what we do is we try and explain that to the client and say, hey, you have a significant risk here. This policy has this exclusion. What's your feeling on it? Do you want to address it by replacing it? Do you want to address it by, us finding a different insurance carrier? How do you want to do it? And, we have that kind of engagement. What's happening now is that business owners are moving very fast. They've got to produce a lot very quickly, and they don't have time to sit involved. So they call their agent, who they know, someone that they've known, like, and trusted, and that agent may or may not be an expert in commercial insurance. And that's why our firm, Whitney Commercial Insurance Advisors, is we are strictly commercial insurance. And we've developed an expertise over that. And that's all I've ever done for almost 37 years.
37 years. We didn't get into it, but why commercial insurance?
That's a great question. It's like everybody else. How did you end up here? I can honestly tell you that I have absolutely no idea, other than in 1989, when I graduated from college, there were literally no jobs. It was back then they called it, or now they call it, the George Bush recession, George Bush #1 recession. And there was no jobs out there. Well, I knocked on I talked to my stepfather, and he pulled some strings, and he said, yeah, go talk to this guy. And we went and talked to this one business, this one agency. And he said, sure, I'll hire you, but I'm not going to pay hardly anything. And, we'll see how you can survive.
Given your history, I think that the fact that there are no jobs out there and it's extremely slim pickings is not something that's going to hold you back.
No, we didn't. So, we have, and I say this lovingly, he used to joke, back then we used to wear a suit, even if it's August or September, we'd wear a suit, and he would go, all right, Bible salesman, let's go out there and sell some insurance, go knock on doors. And you drop us off on one end of a warehouse district and then meet us at the other end. And, by then you're soaking wet, you're in your suit. And he was from the South, so he used to joke that we all looked like a bunch of Bible salesmen. So it was kind of funny. But when you're 21 years old, you don't have a job, and you've got to make some money, and you got to figure out how to make a life of this. You figure it out. So you just went out there and figured it out.
Well, so you obviously developed a knack for it. I mean, what about insurance is just something that makes sense for Ty Whitney? What about it is really motivates you?
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's the one thing. I don't know what it was. I seem to have landed in the right place at the right time. And when I started understanding actually what I was doing, which, for the first year, 2 years, you really don't understand exactly what you're doing, especially when you're 21 years old. And I think when I graduated, I was 20. So, and then I started hitting the doors at 20. So I really just didn't understand. You graduate from business school and you've got all this stuff in your head about what a business is going to, and there I am in suits on industrial districts, soaking wet, walking up and down, knocking on doors. So, but I can tell you what, I fell in love with it. I absolutely fell in love with it. And I can't say it any other way. It really turned me on. And I started, when I went to training, which back then Aetna was in the property casualty commercial business. And when I went into Aetna's training program in Hartford, which was, I think, 2 months. And all you did was sit there and read insurance policies for 2 months, 12 hours a day. I think it was 6 days a week. And so you read insurance policies. So you started to understand after reading them, how they flow, what the intent of the contract is, how to explain it to somebody, but more importantly, how it varied by carrier. They would pull different examples in by different companies, and one company would exclude something, the other company would not. And, you started to see, okay, there is no consistency here. And you have to really understand what you are selling and what you're providing to people. So you learn really quick. I better read and understand it. And by the way, it also did one other thing, which was the key to this business. It taught me how to analyze some other agent's work and say to the client, this is really a great policy, don't change. Or, boy, you got a lot of problems, we need to make a change right away. Or how do you want to handle it? You start to learn pretty quickly how to understand the way those policies are written, and that there's a lot of bad insurance contracts out there.
Wow. Are there any companies or red flags when you read a policy that you say, uh-oh, this is not going to be a good policy?
There are, I won't use names, but I can tell you that there are certain insurance carriers that make it a practice of selling what I would call cheap, fast, and easy insurance policies. In other words, the underwriting is very loose. Just a quick aside, one of the big complaints that a lot of our clients have, and the clients I talk to, is that there is a fair amount of engagement prior to setting up a policy. And the reason for that engagement is to understand exactly what the client's doing, what the risk factors are, and how do we identify those risk factors and then transfer those over to an insurance policy in a cost-effective manner. And so really, the big issue is understanding what that client's goals and objectives are from both a coverage perspective and a cost perspective, and then trying to merge all those ideas together. Trying to put all those ideas together into a policy that meets their goals, meets their objectives, keeps it within the budget. And that's not always easy because there is no standardization. But getting back to your question, there are so many companies out there where they don't ask those questions. It's very easy to get in the door. And, I always joke, if it's easy, it's diseasy. There's something wrong with it. And if a client tells me, well, I just bought this over the internet, took 5 minutes. Well, okay, let's take a look at it. And or I just called my agent and he didn't ask any questions, and I signed a couple of documents and off I went. And
so you really
that's dangerous.
You get to know your clients.
Yes.
You get to know their business.
Definitely.
And is there something that you see regularly or something that pops up with some frequency where these clients are missing out on maybe a particular coverage that everybody should have that are being excluded? Or is it everything has got it's specific to what the industry is and to what the client is.
Yeah, it can be. It's definitely specific. Each business is so unique, and each owner's perspective is so unique. That has to be taken into consideration while we're doing those discovery conversations. And I like to call it a diagnostic review. You can't, a doctor can't fix you if they can't look at the body and see what's going on. A good commercial insurance agent digs into the policy that the business owner has at the moment and understands what's going on there. Is it good? Is it bad? Our company philosophy that when we accept a new client or start working on a new client, we put that client in a equal to or better than position than they're in now. We never want to go backwards. But the point being is that if it's cheap, quick, and easy, there's something seriously wrong with it. And if no one's bothering to spend time to understand the business, then that's a really big problem. And that could develop into a big problem. And so we work hard to engage with those clients, with those prospective clients and current clients on a regular basis to make sure we understand what's going on. With the current clients, it's really changes that occur in their business. It's very common that we get a call saying, hey, we're opening up a division, or we're going to be taking on a new type of work. A classic example is I'm working right now on a client that's has a stone and tile installation business. Well, they got their general contractor's license and now they're renovating homes. Well, that's a totally different risk basis. And once we started to understand that, I said, well, tell me what's going on and let's understand it. Did it change their insurance portfolio? Absolutely, because we had to adjust the insurance contract to meet the needs of the new division that they were opening up. The current insurance contract was really for a tile and stone installation company. It did not contemplate all the risks associated with hiring a plumber, electrician, and landscape coming, all these other folks that you have to bring on, all these subs that you have to bring on the job to achieve the objective of renovating a home. And so we had to really dig into that. One of the things that we did and that we engage with you with, Kunal, is, and I love doing it because you're so attuned to this issue, is, we talk to the clients about updating their subcontractor agreement.
Yeah.
Making sure that they are transferring as much risk to the subcontractor in their agreement. In other words, if you hire a general contractor, the contractor's, working for the homeowner, but the general contractor's hiring a plumber. Well, what happens if that plumber accidentally drills into another contractor, or somebody drills into a pipe and floods out the house? That's going to be a major problem. Or there's a faulty installation of a pipe and it floods out the house. So we have to have the subcontractor agreement set up and address those risks in advance. You can't do that after the claim. You got to do it before the claim. And so that's why, Kunal, we love working with you and your firm, because you help us address those with the clients that don't understand that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I mean, I think the philosophy I have with construction in general is that it's a risk allocation. It's all risk allocation. I'm lucky to have clients that know what they're doing, that are good at what they do, but it's the risk allocation, if something goes wrong, that doesn't fall squarely on their shoulders. If they mess up, if they do something wrong, that's where the insurance policy is so important to come in there and say, all right, we've made a mistake, we'll take it on the chin, but we're going to have an insurance policy to protect us. So it seems to me that your philosophy really is that this is a long-term relationship. This is something that you're going to be working on throughout somebody's professional career, throughout their development of their business, to make sure that as new risks pop up, that you're hitting them. And I think that the industry can seem a bit like whack-a-mole, where you've got one area that you can resolve and you can handle that risk, and then some new dangerous thing comes out that can potentially take a good chunk of your business away from you. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of cybersecurity, which I know is a hot button issue, and I think it's going to remain so. So are there any issues that you see that are popping up that you're almost like you're playing whack-a-mole and hitting one and then a new problem comes up?
Yes, definitely. So the biggest deficiency that all businesses have is the cyber insurance. And that's the single biggest whack-a-mole that's coming out of the ground right now that you definitely have to knock down. That being said, there are new risks emerging every day now with AI. and especially media liability is now a big issue. And we're seeing more and more related activity, legal activity, as it relates to media liability. So I think with the cyber, let me hop on that for a second, is the cyber liability for most companies is very, very reasonable and inexpensive for a very robust insurance policy. We have companies that are doing $30 million a year that are in the construction industry, and their cyber insurance is $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for the best policy you can buy on the market. So now, if you're a shopping cart on the internet and you're accepting a lot of credit card payments or potentially even the medical industry, those high target, high theft areas are higher premiums. But still, as a percentage of revenue, most times the insurance is very inexpensive comparative to revenue. So as a percentage. So it's one of those areas where if, whoever hears this, sees this podcast is please talk to your agent and tell them that you are looking for the most robust cyber liability insurance policy you can buy. Because by the way, the word cyber liability is interchangeable. There is no standardization. There is no regular standardized policy language. They're all different, but there are only a few companies that are providing the best product on the market with, with various different towers of protection built into it.
Well, I mean, besides holding secure information like credit cards, you could be locked out of your business. I mean, imagine if you had no access to your computer, all the data's gone, and you've got a ransomware attack. You're shut down. You're gonna pay them whatever they want, assuming you can. Otherwise, close the doors, turn the lights off, and close the doors on your way out. And there are policies that can protect you for that.
There are. The cyber liability policy, cyber crime policy is undoubtedly the single biggest defense against that. I can honestly tell you, I've been a victim. In a prior business partnership, we had our agency management system was compromised, not at our level, not at the agency level, but at the mothership hosting level. And it was a very, very serious event. We had no data for 13 days while they were working on correcting the problem. This was a company that handles a lot of insurance agencies around the United States. And that particular event brought a significant number of insurance agencies to a complete and absolute stop. And when you're in that situation for 13 days, that was the longest 13 days I've ever had. Now, we had the best cyber liability policy in place.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. I think that was good advice.
That's right. So what actually happened was I picked up the phone, we filed a claim, and within I think it was 6 to 12 hours, I can't even remember, but I know it was almost instantaneous looking back on it. We had a law firm assigned. That law firm was communicating with the law firm of the mothership hosting company that was dealing with the breach, and they were all communicating. And it was a crisis. It was a crisis it could brought a lot of businesses to their knees. And the fact of the matter was, in 13 days, we were back up. In 13 days, we had a certification that the data had not been breached. That was the good news. It was what they call a crypto lock or a cyber lock. You couldn't get in, you couldn't get out. It was almost like they took the data, put it in a safe, and you couldn't access it until somebody unlocked it. They took them 13 days to unlock it, but there again, the most important issue that came out of that was I learned what happens when your business is shut down due to a cyber event. And I can honestly tell you, I don't think I slept for 13 days. I mean, it was a long 13 days trying to figure out how are we going to pull out of this? And it was going to be so from that point forward, like I said, we had great insurance at the time. The problems were all solved. The legal aspects were solved. The certifications by the federal government were solved and the state government. And we moved forward in a great way. And I still work with that same insurance company to this day, and I'll never leave their side. They did a great job.
That's testimonial if I've ever heard one. And you didn't sleep, and you had a good policy. Imagine if you didn't have a policy. If you had gone to the internet and completed a policy in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was a very, very scary event and very real. And the good news is we came out of it, and they came out of it as a company. And there was a lot of corrective actions that were made by everybody. And now that's a big, cybersecurity, cyber protection with our IT folks is a big part of our budget. It's worth spending money on because being without data and being without a system, you're out of business. That's it.
I
So,
think you're it almost feels like you're a gazelle in the rain in the savannah where it's just a matter of being targeted. Once you
yes,
get targeted, you're going to have a bad day, and you're just hopefully luck of the draw that today's not your day.
that's right.
Hopefully luck of the draw today's not your day unless you have some robust protections.
Exactly right. So it's like being in surfing, with the sharks around and all the fish around, and being part of the school of fish and being able to surf with a fence around you. So that's great. So the sharks can't get you. So I
Perfect
feel
analogy. There you go. Bringing it right back. Bringing it right back.
not
Perfect
that
analogy.
practical, but
Yeah.
it's worth the investment. I can honestly tell you. Talk to your agent about that, whoever they are. Make sure they know.
You mentioned something before, media liability coverage. I'm just curious as to what is media liability coverage?
So media liability coverage, which in some cases, it's included in a cyber liability policy. Media liability covers. So let's say that somebody posts something on a website or on social media, and there might be some unauthorized pictures in there of just a person in the background. That's simple. Person in the background. What's happening now with AI is the AI is scrubbing those kind of potential risks, identifying where there's somebody that might not have known that they were in a picture, or a trademark, or a copyright, or some form of IP is in the picture that no one knows about. Or, there's a myriad of scenarios I could give, but let's just go with the person right now. I have had a case where one of our clients was pursued because they took a picture in their establishment and there were some folks in the background who did not authorize their photos being taken. And through AI, those individuals were identified. Somehow a law firm ended up with that, figuring out that they weren't an authorized party in those pictures. And the lawyer pursued my client under media liability and trying to recover funds for 10 years that these photos were utilized without the people's knowledge. And that became obviously a very big and very costly problem for that business owner. And we had insurance for it. It was handled, it was defended, but it was expensive. It was a big claim. So that's an example of media liability. You're posting things on the internet without authorization. By the way, Kunal, I authorize you to use this.
Oh, I should. We'll get that in writing. We don't need it in writing. We've got it. We've got you
I've already
on
agreed.
screen.
I've agreed to it.
So, I mean, that just seems like a crazy circumstance or an unusual circumstance. You've been in the industry for so long. What's the craziest claim you've ever seen?
Yeah, I'll have to give you the second most crazy claim. So
Okay.
I don't want
It's a
to, I don't
family
want to,
program. This is a family
yeah, I
program.
don't want to say anything that would, there's been some crazy claims, but I can, first of all, let me touch on workers' comp. When I talk about this, I'm talking about this in all seriousness, but, people do get hurt when they're on the job, and we do have a fairly sizable construction book. And we had someone working for a crane company that stepped off of the third story and passed. Unfortunately, they didn't live through it. And then I've had scenarios with employees on a landscape company where they were mowing lawn on one of those riding on mowers, and they were on an embankment, on an angled embankment in a golf course community, and the riding mower rolled over into the pond on top of the employee. And the employee did live, but they had permanent lung damage and issues for the rest of their life. The point being of that story is that that client had been for years going without workers' compensation. And we kept talking to him about, you need to get this done. You need to get this done. We need to get it done right. And we ended up getting it done right. We ended up also, when we investigated what happened with regards to the claim, and by the way, OSHA also had investigated, they had taken off the roll bar that is standard for riding mowers. The roll bar is designed to protect the driver in the event that the mower does roll over, and they had removed that. So there was some risk that came back and some fines. And so that's I know I don't want to say it's a crazy claim, but it's a claim where so many claims that we see could have been prevented. And we try and talk to our clients. We try and bring in safety consultants where the client is willing or wants those kind of services and needs those kind of services. Obviously, in an office environment, it's a much different exposure than to a construction or to a landscape or a tree company, things like that. So we work hard to try and identify those risks and work with those clients to make sure that they don't make those kind of mistakes, which is removing safety equipment and things like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely don't remove the safety equipment.
Yeah.
Don't remove the roll bar. And of course, you've got plenty of experience in the landscaping business.
Yes.
So, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit. This is what I like this part. This is a fun part where I'm going to ask you some questions you've already given me. And you're going to repeat them and give me the answer. We're going to try to make this into 45-second, 60-second clips. So one of the questions is, why is it that my premiums never seem to go down and they only increase?
Right. Yeah, I can honestly. Well, 90% of the time, it's due to business. Their revenue increases or their payroll increases, their exposure expands. Second thing is that
I'm going to pause you right there. If you could repeat the question, that'll make a better clip.
Sure. So your question, Kunal, was why do my premiums never seem to go down? They always seem to only go up. And the reason is twofold. A, it might be because of the business continues to expand and grow. Their revenue grows, their footprint grows, their exposure to the world grows, their exposure to risk grows, and their employees and payroll continue to grow. So premium is reflective of what's going on in the business. Second reason is that a lot of times it's due to claims. The client has had claims, and there's insurance is also known as risk financing, and you're financing that risk. And when you have claims, you're basically going to get an increase in your finance cost, if you will. So that gives you a little bit about that.
So how do claims affect a company's insurance, or how long do they last?
Yeah, great question. So when a client has a claim, most insurance companies, your question was, how does a claim affect the overall premium? How long does it last? It's typically a 5-year look back in commercial insurance. The insurance companies want to see a 5-year history because claims might happen in year 1, but not be settled until year 4. So the claims develop or change over time. They might be taken down, they might be increased, reserves can change. So there's a lot that can go on in that period of time. And that's why they look at a 5-year period.
So what amount of liability insurance should we purchase?
Yeah, that's a great question. All right. I don't know if I can do that one in 45 seconds, but I'm going to give it a shot. All right. You're thrown into a cage. Yes. Okay.
Don't forget to ask a
Yeah.
question. It makes for better audio. It makes for better
That's
clips.
right.
Makes for better clips.
That's right. Your question was, how, repeat that again. I'm sorry.
So what amount of liability or limits should my policy have?
Your question was, what amount of liability should my policy have? And, what's the proper amount? A simple way to say it is, it's hard to determine that because it all depends on the claim. Obviously, if it's a $50 million claim, you're going to wish you had $50 million worth of coverage. But if it's, your typical claims, most companies have $1 million worth of liability or more. We recommend $5 million worth of coverage. Typically, that's a good starting point for most companies, but some companies just can't afford that. That's just not realistic in the budget. But that's typically our answer is $1 million to start.
So what about my company doesn't process credit cards? Why do I need a cyber liability policy?
Excellent. Well, if you have the robust policy, the policy that we recommend, your question is, why should I buy, if I don't process credit cards, why should I buy a cyber liability policy? And Kunal, the answer is that cyber liability, a true cyber liability policy, has more than just credit card PII protection. It's really protection, not just also for cyber crime. In other words, somebody breaks into your bank account and steals money. Somebody, so it picks up cyber crime. It also picks up media liability in some cases. It also picks up extortion. Somebody hacks your account and holds onto your data, extortion. There's various other aspects of those types of policies, which we could obviously go through in more detail.
How does a new driver affect my policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. How does a new driver affect my policy? All right, real simple. So there are two types of commercial auto policies. One is a commercial auto policy that accounts for each individual driver. The second type of policy is one that just says, yes, this driver's acceptable, or no, they're not, and the price doesn't change. On the first one that we just spoke about, that policy premium can change based on the driving record. So if you hire someone with a DUI, driving or a reckless driving, that is going to immediately translate into a higher premium. But if you're with a company that says acceptable or non-acceptable, they won't accept the driver because he or she has a DUI, and they will just say that's not acceptable and your premium stays flat. So there's, issues that we have to talk about in those kind of scenarios also.
Interesting. How about this one? How about why should my company have employment practices liability?
Okay, great. So employment practices, your question is, why should my company have employment practices liability? Okay, so every employer that has employees has a risk. And what is that risk? The risk is sexual harassment, wrongful termination, discrimination, failure to promote, so forth and so on. We can go on and on with those. But the truth of the matter is, we live in a society where people, when they're terminated, or even if they're in an environment where they don't feel comfortable, they will talk to an attorney, and that kind of litigation or that kind of discussion, when you hire your attorney, can become very, very expensive from the minute go. So it's designed that particular policy is designed to provide a defense, and it's, if necessary, a subsequent settlement. So I think they're very necessary.
That's what you're doing. You're running a business. You should have coverage for running your business, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So what are some common mistakes that you see business owners make as it relates to their insurance?
Yeah, great question. What are the common mistakes a business owner makes when it comes to considering commercial insurance? The number one thing is that I see that folks is they really don't understand what they're buying, and they don't engage with the agent and really demand, for the lack of a better way of saying it, say, hey, I'm spending all this money on this policy or these policies. Let's go through them. Let's understand. It's 1 hour. Just spend 1 hour understanding the policy, going through it, learning about the policy and understanding it, and learning about its terms and conditions. And then take another hour someday, not when you're laying down in bed getting ready to go to sleep, because I guarantee it'll put you to sleep. But take some time and review those policies again on your own and just understand them. That's one of the biggest mistakes we see make. The other one is they'll spend a fortune in auto insurance, and they'll spend a fortune on liability insurance, again, depending on the company. But then they'll get very, very skittish over spending $1,500, $2,000 on a cyber liability policy, when probably the biggest risk of the company that could truly bring it to a stop is cyber liability. I mean, an auto accident, sure, it's going to interrupt the company. It's going to affect the efficiency of the company without that vehicle, and you have the potential liability, but the insurance policy is going to handle that. Cyber liability is the one claim where if they get a hold of your data and they lock you up, you are out of business.
Wow.
And no matter what business that is. And I've seen it happen to construction companies, legal law firms. I've seen it insurance agencies, on and on and on. It just goes, CPA firms. I've seen it happen, and it brings those businesses to their knees. The question is, can they get out of it?
That's powerful. That's powerful. Well, thank you for being with me. I appreciate your time. So for our listeners out there, how can they get in touch with Whitney Commercial Insurance?
Thank you very much. Kunal, I appreciate it. Obviously, I welcome those. For those of you that have a very good relationship with your agent, my recommendation is reach out to your agent, review your policies, go over everything. If you don't feel you have that relationship, and you're really seeking a relationship that's directly engaged, exclusively commercial insurance, and is what you need as part of your trusted advisor team as you build your company, then please reach out to me. My cell phone number is 954-448-971, and my email address is ty, at uciadvisors, with an S plural, .com. That's Ty at uciadvisors.com. feel free to also visit our website at that same domain name on the email, and we'll go from there. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Ty. And for everybody out there, if this episode helped you reevaluate your business and the risk associated with us, please reach out to Ty. Again, I've known him for 10 years. He's phenomenal at what he does. And please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunal. Appreciate it.